All right, hi guys, this is Mark Brunet, and well, I'm pretty excited because we have a big tutorial ahead of us, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So there's a ton of stuff to cover, and I'm going to run you guys through a little bit of, the entire kind of break down the different chapters. So I'm going to start off with this one, and this one is going to be about what it really is to be a concept artist. What it is that you guys are aiming for. Get an idea of that first, because that's very important. And then I will take you through a typical day working at a game studio, at a AAA game studio, what that looks like, if that's your goal. And then after that, so the following chapters, we're going to be working on a fake project. So it's a fake character concept art project. So we're going to have a bunch of guidelines that we need to follow. We're going to be making a bunch of different characters, a bunch of different variations. So it'll give you a really, really good idea of the kind of stuff that you would do if you were actually working. And it's also a very good thing to try to mimic on your own, even if you're not working, especially actually if you're not working, because that will get you in the groove. That will get you the knowledge that you need to have to be able to get that job. So a lot of stuff to cover, and at the very end, we'll be talking about how to, once all the art is done and we've covered everything that you actually do, that you actually create. After that, we'll move on to creating a really, really, really good portfolio and how it is to apply for jobs and actually get that job, right? So we're gonna try to cover the entire spectrum of beginning to end, and the end being that you get the job that you want. So there's a lot of stuff to cover, and first of all, I want to talk a little bit about me. So who am I, for those that don't know? So I am at this point a retired artist. So I've had a 12 years career. So it all started back in the days when I was doing a comic book coloring. So that was kind of like my first real jobs. I was coloring comic books, and like nothing big, just small private productions here and there. So that was a lot of fun. And also I was doing a lot of freelance on the side, so working for a lot of independent clients, doing a lot of commissions for just the regular public. And then I moved on to the game industry. So I started to work at A2M, which is a more specifically mobile game company, but we were working on their next gen kind of division. They were trying to branch out to that. Now they're called Behavior Interactive, so they still exist. And then after 2 years of that, I moved on to Blizzard Entertainment, and I worked there for about a little under 8 years, working on a bunch of different projects. So I worked at first on Titan, which you might now know is Overwatch. And I also worked on StarCraft, Legacy of the Void, and Heroes of the Storm. So I've had a pretty good experience, working on a bunch of different teams, on a bunch of different projects. Some of them were pre-production, some of them were productions. So I have I would think a very good understanding of what it is to be a concept artist, in those different stages of a game cycle, and for freelance. I will also be talking a little bit about movies, because I have so many friends in the movie industry. So over the years, I've had a really good overview of what it is to actually work there. But basically, being a concept artist, character concept artist more specifically, because that's what I know, is fairly similar in all those different fields. So in video game art, film art, and freelance. What is it to be a concept artist, really? What is it? The big definition of what it is, it depends a little bit depending where you're working. So if you're working at a game studio or a movie studio, but generally speaking, it'll be an artist that works during the stages of pre-prod in movie, or even before pre-prod, and then pretty much throughout the pre-prod and production for games. Then your job will be to bring ideas to life. So that's a very broad definition, but that's pretty much what it is. So that'll of course depend where you're working. So if you're working for a video game company, like let's say a really small video game company, like a an indie game, you'll get to do a lot more as a concept artist. So you'll be able to create maybe like environments and basically everything, right? So because normally they don't have as much funding, as much money, so they can't afford that many artists. So you'll get to do a lot more, wear a lot more hats. If you're working on a big AAA production, you'll be more like specialized. So in this case, a character concept artist is what we'll be looking at. But you could be working in as an environment artist, as a prop artist, as a weapons artist, depending, vehicles. It depends how big the production is and what the importance of each of those things have. So if you're working for a first-person shooter, for sure you'll have someone that's focusing on weapons only, because those are almost as important as characters. But yeah, it all depends of the game. If you're working in the movie industry, you'll be working again in a very similar fashion as a big game production. So you'll be specialized, working on certain things that you're really good at, and of course there's always some people that are good at everything, that do everything, and but those we're not gonna be talking about those people. As far as the stability of the jobs, so if you're working in films, you tend to work before pre-prod and pre-prod, so right at the beginning of the project, and then after that you move on when the filming begins, because you're no longer needed. So and then you have to move on to another project and another project. So you tend to go through a lot of projects during a year if you want to stay employed, which is a little bit more stressful, and for some people a lot less stable. If you're working in video games, you tend to work throughout the entire development cycle of the game that you're working on, and that's a couple years generally speaking, and that tends to be a lot more of a stable job. And if you're freelance, then it just depends of your business sense, because working freelance is pretty much running your own business. So if you're good at getting clients, if you're good at selling your stuff, then you'll probably be okay. But for this, we're going to be talking about more of a big company, a big AAA studio, how they do things, and how it works in those companies. So before I run you guys through what it is, what a typical day is working at one of those studios, I wanted to make a couple things very, very clear as to what you should be doing to, if you're not doing them already, to get there. Those are, I'm going to try to give you guys as much as I can, as much knowledge as I possibly can. But if you don't do your part, it's never going to work. And that starts with the following. So first things first, you have to know what your goal is. Your goal cannot be just being a concept artist. That's not precise enough. You have to have a very clear vision of where you want to go, where you want to end up. And that could be something like working at a particular game company. So knowing on what project you want to work on, or at what company you work at, or at least what style and what kind of games you want to work on, so that you can orient and direct your art to be that. Knowing your audience is so important. So when if you know that you want to go work at I'm gonna give Blizzard for example, because that's where I worked, but it could be any other studio. If you want to work at Blizzard, for example, you need to be doing Blizzard art, or like Blizzard-ish art, stuff that they could see on their own game. Otherwise you're not helping your case. So let's say you were working on a bunch of like army stuff, and you're trying to apply for Blizzard, which is the complete opposite, right? It's not at all realistic. It's completely fantasy or sci-fi oriented, super stylized. There cannot be a discrepancy there. You have to work towards what you want to do, and your art has to show that. So when you show your portfolio, people have to know right away what it is that you want to do. Otherwise, you're gonna be wasting your time. So know your audience, know where your goal is, and produce art that will take you there. So that's super important. And of course, after that, of course, master your fundamentals. Become a good artist. You can't rely on tricks, or you can't push this back at a later time. Practice. There's no other way around. There's no shortcuts. nobody in the industry will ever tell you that there's a shortcut, because, and if they do, they're bullshitting you. There's no shortcuts. You have to just do the work, put in the time, and that's what this is. So with that said, I am going to run you guys through a kind of like a typical day for a concept artist, and as you will see, I'm sure, it's a lot less intense than you probably think. So at least from my experience. So yeah, generally speaking, working in game dev, I'm not sure about movies, but working in games, you tend to start a little bit later, or at least you can start a little bit later. So I would normally come in around at around 10, or like 9:30, 10 in the morning, and yeah, it's normally pretty flexible, from 8 to 10. And then you come in at work, you unpack, you go grab yourself a coffee, maybe breakfast if you're, the studio you're working at have a cafeteria. So you go grab your breakfast and your coffee, and then you come back to your desk and browse a bunch of art, get inspired for the day, and then you get probably started, or very likely you will have a kind of like a daily stand-up meeting where all the concept artists will kind of meet and present what they've been working on, the following day, the previous day. So you just show your stuff, and you try to explain it as best as you can, and try to sell it as best as you can, and then you see what everybody else is working on. You kind of get even more motivated that way, because you will likely see a bunch of cool stuff. And then you go back to your desk. Maybe people will have a bunch of feedback on what you've been working on. So you take that into consideration, take a bunch of notes, and then you come back to your desk and then get started. So by that time it's probably like 10:30, something like that. So yeah, you get started. You work maybe like an hour and a half on your stuff. Try to address the feedback that you've received in the morning, and then then it's probably time for lunch. So you go have lunch, likely with a bunch of colleagues. Maybe you go grab a bite at a restaurant or something, and then you come back, and and then after lunch, something around like 1 p.m. You get back, and then you start working again. So now it's gonna be like the bigger chunk of the day where you get to actually sit down and do a lot of work uninterrupted. The morning is usually a little bit more hectic. So you'll work on whatever you were assigned for, whatever you were continuing from the previous day, and maybe at this point, shortly after lunch, you'll have enough that you'll be able to go to your art lead or your art director or whatever, and then present what you've been working on. So it's always a good idea to have a couple things to show them at once, so that you don't waste time. And if they don't like one thing, then maybe you can show something else and convince them that maybe the other way is another good alternative. So yeah, you just go and then you show them your stuff as often as possible, and you get their feedback. And then often they'll have a lot of feedback, a lot of things that they want you to change. And so you go back, and maybe a lot of things that they like. So they're like, I like this part, I like that part, maybe merge those two and then go that direction, and come back to me later. So yeah, you take their feedback, you go back to your desk, you keep working a little bit more. So now it's probably like something like 3 in the afternoon. Now it's time for a snack and a little bit of a break. So you go grab a snack, maybe another coffee, and just browse the internet a little bit more, get some more inspiration, look at cool concepts. And you can actually do that throughout the day, of course. But and then so take a little break, because working on concepts is it's actually very demanding for the brain. So you have to constantly think of new stuff and try to come up with cool shit. So it's demanding. So it's good that you take breaks. And so after a little bit of break, you come back, you keep working on the stuff. Maybe you've come up with a bunch of cool ideas. You can go show them off to your leads again, see what they have to think of, what they think about that new direction. They'll give you some more pointers, and then you come back to your desk and you finish up for the rest of the day. So and then you leave at around, I don't know, like 6:30, depending on when you came to work. So. Or sometimes, often, you stay after work and then you play a little bit of a game, and then you come back. So that's kind of a typical day. So in the morning, meeting, a lot of art browsing, getting inspired, and then the second half of the day is just getting stuff done as much as possible. So of course, that schedule is going to vary greatly depending on what you're working at. You might have a lot more independence. You might have a little less, depending. If you're in a pre-prod, generally like everything goes. So you get to work on a lot of different things. You get to throw your ideas out there because you're just brainstorming. It's a pre-production. There's nothing set in stone. If you're working in a production, it's going to be a little bit more strict. So you'll have tighter deadlines maybe. So your concept might not have. You might not have the time to polish them as much. So yeah, it's always like a balance, and it always depends. But generally speaking, like if I look back on my 10 years, that was a pretty typical day. Now, if you're working from home as a freelance artist, I would say it can be very similar. So it all depends on what kind of schedule you set yourself. But yeah, it's always good to set yourself a schedule. If you're just going by like slacking and then trying to get the work done in very little time, then not sleeping, you'll burn out really, really quickly as a freelance artist. So you really need that structured schedule, structured work environment, even if you're working on your own. That will make it a more viable option, if that's something you want to do for a long time. Other than that, here's some pictures. So that's the first desk that I had at Blizzard. So as you can see here, also this is a very typical desk. So you see a lot of action figures, a lot of art books, some pen and papers to take notes, and 2 monitors. So that's kind of like the typical setup that you'll have. When as far as the tools that you need to be a concept artist, you don't need much, to be honest, but you need to go digital. So that's something that's very important. If you've been working just with traditional like pens and pencils so far, that's likely not going to cut it unless you are godlike. You want to be working digitally because that's the standard for all the different studios, at least all the big studios, and that's just and for a reason. It's just it makes things a lot faster. It makes things a lot easier to iterate on. So let's say the way you set up your files, you can switch the color really, really quickly. You will see with this particular project, this tutorial, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So yeah, work digitally with any kind of tablet. It doesn't matter. Most of them work pretty well. You don't need a Cintiq, not at all, like I have at home. It's just it adds a little bit of fun, but that's it. That's all it is. And I use it as a second monitor if I do like a video editing, that kind of stuff. So it's actually useful to have 2 monitors. But you can have 2 monitors and maybe like just a pen tablet. So any kind of pen tablet should do the trick. You don't need a Cintiq. It's just for fun. And then you'll need Photoshop, which is very affordable. It's $10 a month to get it on a subscription. Or you can grab any other kind of art software. I just want to say though that in the industry, Photoshop is the standard, so it's good. It's also not only good, but very important that you actually learn it. Even if you don't use it at home for some reason, you should get on Photoshop and be very, very good at it, because that's the tool of choice. So yeah, a pen tablet, Photoshop, you should be good to go. So that's all you need. Now that we know kind of the requirements, what it is to be a concept artist, of course I'm going to be talking about about it some more throughout the tutorial. But now let's get started with our fake project.